Hi, everyone, once again. And it's so nice to see a lot of you. A lot of the similar people, the same people have been coming back to the event. So it's really nice to see that. This time we have a keynote with Mara, and she's going to talk about AI explainability through data storytelling. So today, with AI being so pervasive in all our lives, we need data stories to illuminate how AI works and affects our lives. Through some of Mara's projects, she's going to reveal how data narratives can transform the impersonality of merely technical approach to AI by connecting programming languages, code, or ML models to what they really stand for: solutions, knowledge, industries, businesses, and people, because often all this can get lost. So, to shed more light on this, we have Mara here today. So, Mara is a lead AI content strategist at IBM, and she defines and designs strategy for AI solutions by revealing overlooked insights hidden in the company's data. So, without any further ado, we have Mara here. Mara, the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen and we are ready to go.
Awesome.
Okay. Okay. Hopefully you see my screen.
Yep, all good.
Okay. So, hi everyone, and thank you so much, Avantika, for the introduction. I'm, oops, there is background noise, guys. Okay, let's mute.
Everyone who just joined in, could you please mute your mics?
I was saying thank you so much for the introduction. Again, my name is Mara. I'm Italian, as you can guess from my accent, but I live in London. And I'm really excited to be with you guys today. First of all, because I love the work that the AI for Design community is doing. And so I'm really honored to be here. And second reason is that I believe that this is a crucial moment in time to have conversations around how we can improve and even envision the way we communicate the AI's outcome and the AI's results. As we said, AI today is so pervasive in our lives. And so hopefully this keynote will be inspiring for you. I'm an AI content strategist at IBM, and actually, I work for the Chief AI Officer team. And to be honest, AI content strategist is a title that I created for myself to better define what I do in my daily job. And what this really means is that I define and design AI business solutions by crafting the AI's outcome into new content, revealing the vision for long-term AI strategies. And I do that by applying an editorial approach to AI practices. And this involves running design thinking workshops specifically tailored to address data-centric and AI problems. And of course, the big topic of today's conversation, crafting and creating visual data stories that transform the algorithms and models into actual knowledge, insights, and concrete business results. And for this reason, I've always found myself at the intersection of the technical and the business realms. And I act kind of a translator who bridges these two different worlds together through data stories. And this might sound weird to some of you, because usually if we think of data storytelling and data stories, we imagine environments and contexts like news media outlets, journalism, data design agencies, and so on. instead, now I'm talking about data storytelling in the context of business and in the context especially of AI, so a very technical domain. Because if we really think through that, data stories are a powerful means that we can use to really explain how AI models or algorithms are built, how they work, and how they impact our life. And by really telling the stories hidden in the code that makes the AI technology, we can help people to better understand what really AI is and how it interacts with our life. But of course, the idea of data storytelling applied to AI practices didn't come by chance. This is the result of years of experimentations by working with data scientists and IBM clients and trying to figure out how and where I would fit in that context with my own skills. And that's why today I would love to share with you my story, the personal story of my journey in IBM, because I want to bring you with me where everything started, where this idea of data storytelling applied to AI practices started. When I got the job in IBM, when I was hired as a data journalist for a team that is named IBM Data Science and AI Lead Team. I was really excited when I got the job. I was excited about the role because I knew very well that I wanted to be where innovation is taking place, where AI is shaking things up. But I didn't have any clue about why a team of data scientists was looking for a data journalist. And it happened that as soon as I joined the team, I got in touch with my new colleagues, and some of them were machine learning engineers, other were data engineers, other decision optimization experts. And then we had proper data scientists and statisticians and people dedicated to the business growth of the team. And then there was me, the only data journalist in this team of data scientists. And I was full of doubts because I really didn't know how my skills would help my new colleagues to achieve their business objectives. Think about that. Overall, I was coming from the environment of newsrooms, from journalism. I had a specific idea of what a data story is, and I couldn't really connect that idea with a totally different environment where we were talking about client engagements. And so I wasn't really sure how to help my new team and how my team would use me. And the the biggest pain point actually of this story was that my colleagues didn't know anything about data journalism. They didn't know what a data journalist usually does. And this led to many different requests regarding making charts and graphics by leveraging every possible libraries like D3JS, Matplotlib, Shiny. They asked me for UI, for dashboards, and yes, that was my face at that time because I was so overwhelmed with these requests about just the data visualizations and charts and graphics. And at that point, it was really clear to me that my new colleagues had this misconception that data visualization is equal to data stories. But this is not true. Data visualization is never the point. Data visualization is only a mean that we use to explore the data and see what the data tells us. But if we want to communicate the stories hidden in data and hidden in our algorithms and AI solutions, we have to use stories. Without stories, we will always fail to communicate data and AI insights. At that point, I really wanted my colleagues to start seeing the data as raw material that they can shape. I wanted them to see in this raw material the hidden patterns and connections that live in the data. And it's by discovering those patterns and those connections that we can really eventually return visually the story of the data's inner structure and complexity. And it's really by taking the insights that and put them together that we can craft a story. But to do that, we always have to pass through context first. And that idea was really clear in my mind. But the problem was how to communicate that message to my new colleagues that overall were all data scientists. Actually, the opportunity to show them what I meant with that came very early in my journey. And this brings me to the second chapter of my story, how I started applying data storytelling to AI use cases. And the opportunity came with this particular IBM client named James Fisher and Son. James Fisher and Son is a leader provider in oil, gas, and marine services. And they approached the data science and AI elite team because they wanted to build a predictive maintenance tool because their urgent need was to identify and locate the failures occurring on the high voltage cables of the wind farm assets. And so as soon as we got the data from James Fisher, my colleagues, data scientists, started their analysis and started building the machine learning model to show the client the predictions they got out of the model. And what they showed to the client at that point really looked something like an hodgepodge of screenshots taken from their Jupyter notebooks. And that, I'm sorry, it was not a story. Not at all. It wasn't a story because it was just a group of separate insights. There was no context whatsoever, neither with the client's problems nor with the company itself, with James Fisher. That presentation was full of technical jargon and too much details for the people we had in the room that for the majority were not data scientists. And it was like having a not articulate speech. So James Fisher could understand in general what we were trying to do with their data. But the knowledge as it was presented wasn't enough to have them take it and do something with it. It wasn't enough to have the client use that knowledge and take action upon that. What if I tell you that from here and now, I'm going to give you this keynote in Egyptian hieroglyphics? How would you feel about that? I believe that would be pretty confusing, right? And that was the exact same feelings of James Fisher in the room. What we were experiencing was a big gap in how the algorithms were being communicated and the human understanding of the people in the room who did not share our same background. They were not data scientists. And so it was like we were talking two different languages and we need a common one to really exchange information and explain what the machine learning model would do to James Fisher companies, what benefits they were providing to these people and their problems. And I believe that was exactly that crack in the process that allowed me to rethink how we approach the engagements with the clients and I proposed to my new colleagues to really take a new approach and start everything from scratch by using an editorial approach to address that AI use case. And so what I did was to run a design thinking workshop that actually I named information design workshop to conceptually understand the information the client needed and they wish they had access to. And from there, I started interviewing all the clients that were working with us, not in terms of UX interviews, but just as I would do in journalism, just to collect as much as, knowledge and information as possible to better understand the James Fisher story and the stories of the people that were working with us, to really try to empathize with them and understand what other problems really they had in that situation. And then I skimmed through my interviews the same way, again, that I would do for a story in journalism, to highlight the most important information that should be part of the story. And that led me, of course, to define my storyline. And after some explorations of the data, I sketched out some possible solution of how the data story could look like. And eventually, as the last step, I implemented the data narrative. And it was by working with this new approach on the smallest story that eventually I ended up discovering a much bigger story. Because actually, James Fisher was keeping asking us for a predictive maintenance tool. But what they really needed was a much larger solution. And I didn't understand that. They didn't realize that until they saw their data coming to life in a cohesive and consistent data narrative, that they understood that what they really needed was a way to connect the technical aspects of the maintenance of the wind farm asset to the business operations of their company. And it was by showing them how the predictions generated by the machine learning model could optimize and make their business more efficient by saving money, and especially by optimizing all the process around the resource allocation and the maintenance schedule. And in this way, we really illuminated how the predictions, so the final outcome of a machine learning model, could be used as an input for another solution and for an input to benefit the client and make them more efficient in what they do. The data narrative, as it was conceived and designed, really was a way to highlight and surface all the opportunities hidden in James Fisher's data and show the client how those opportunities could be leveraged by AI by really combining a predictive model with a prescriptive model. And it was for this reason that eventually the client thought about this data story as a potential AI strategy for them, because they understood that this model, as it was designed, could be applied to other James Fisher subsidiaries and not just to the wind farm assets. And it was exactly in that moment that my colleagues understood that data stories are important not just in journalism, but even, also in data science and AI, because they saw concretely a tangible way on how to translate the code of their Jupyter notebooks into a compelling visual data story. But of course, to craft an effective story, we always have to follow a specific narrative arch. And this arch usually starts with what? What do we need to do? What needs to get done? What defines the scope of the project and, of course, of the story? And then we are all obsessed with how we're gonna do that, how we're gonna implement this solution, how really tells us the process that we are going to follow over the implementation phase. But what if I tell you that there are even two more important things than what and how? First, context, because it's not just what the data says by itself, but it's about how it relates with the context surrounding it. And then we have why. Why is the most important question that we can ask ourselves. And oftentimes, because we are so skillful and so smart, we skip through this word that means everything. Because really, these three letters eventually are the reasons why the story gets written and the project gets done. And this is the art to really get eventually to a compelling narrative, to craft a compelling narrative that visually illuminates how AI works. But there is another important element in the data story, especially in James Fisher example, that is crucial: the format of the data. Because it's proven by many cognitive studies that aesthetics plays a key role in the process of data explorations from the people, from the users, because aesthetics really triggers users' curiosity in the data, helps in making users more willing to explore the data and engage with the data. And especially today, where trust in AI is kept being eroded, the format we choose to represent the data, the design, how we design the data is even more important today, because we really have to find the best visual way to tell the stories hidden in our algorithms. And if we really want to unleash the power of AI, we always have to connect AI to a human conversation. Because every time we create a new solution or we use a new AI technology, eventually what we want to do is communicate those outcomes, those results to people, and try to benefit them through our work. And we can do that only if we engage people through emotions. And that's the power of data stories, because by, I mean, we as humans, we are emotional decision makers mainly. And what really data storytelling does is to stimulate our emotional intelligence by connecting it to our analytical intelligence that drives the decisions. And that's one of the reasons why Gartner, in one of its latest reports, says that by 2025, data stories will be the most widespread way of consuming analytics. And this is very relevant. It's very important argument to keep in mind. And actually, this really leads me to another part of my story. So all the experiments that I'm doing in the context of data storytelling, because I want to find new ways to really consume analytics in a more human, approachable way. And so I want to bring you now into my workshops or workspace, if you like, and show you some of my side projects. As I said at the beginning, now I work for the Chief AI Officer team. And just to give you a little bit of context, the role of a Chief AI Officer is to first define the AI strategy for the company and making sure that all the AI projects and solutions that are being developed inside the company connect to that strategy. And that leads to the digital transformation of the company by really using data and treating data as an enterprise asset that helps generating new value, new business value for a company by leveraging AI solutions. But beyond these very technical and business oriented responsibilities, a chief AI officer can achieve in this goal just by spurring new change inside an organization and increasing the data literacy across teams, and really build a new culture regarding what data we can use, what new content we can generate by using AI, and what new solutions we can combine together by leveraging the power of AI technologies. And this really builds a new vision that get teams really work in a totally different with a totally different mindset toward AI and data. And as you can guess, all these elements are strictly connected and also I would say supported by data storytelling, because oftentimes a chief AI officer has to communicate very new and complex analytical ideas to key internal stakeholders. And data storytelling is crucial in achieving this mission, because it helps in communicating those ideas, those complex ideas around data and AI. And in this context, I started a project last year. It was an internal newsletter with the aim, as I said, to spread this vision and build this new culture around the organization by telling the stories of the digital transformation that the team was working on. And while I was brainstorming around how I wanted this newsletter to look like and what was the style and format that I wanted to use, I was keeping wondering how to integrate data storytelling in the traditional format of a newsletter. And the answer to that question actually came pretty early when I first published the very first issue of that newsletter, because I could perceive that there were some patterns between some words and some sentences used in the text, but I couldn't really grasp the sense of it. And so I thought to build an NLP algorithm, and so to leverage natural language processing. And I parsed through these algorithms the text that I would publish in the newsletter to really extract all the stories hidden behind the text, behind the words, and trying to provide the readers of this newsletter a second layer of information that went deeper than just what they could read or see. And so I used the data produced by that NLP algorithm for visualizing a very unusual data story to really provide readers more context around that particular story that I would publish. And I attached a legend to that visual to really let people explore the data, their meaning, the keywords, and their relationships with the attributes around the keywords, the semantic meaning, and the sentiment of the words and the sentences used, and explore really all the patterns and the connections that the algorithm revealed. And from there, I kept going with experimenting with other visuals by always using that algorithm that actually, with the help of a friend of mine and a colleague, data scientist, we improved that initial algorithm that I wrote, and we used natural language understanding in our suite of Watson products to create an interview processor, to really have a kind of a machine that could help me to really, with AI, to really better see through the text that I was writing and I was publishing. And that provides me with a deeper level of understanding of what I was telling to people, what stories I was creating for them. And also, it made me more aware of the real meaning around words like data, AI strategy, digital transformation. And so I discovered, and as many other readers, a lot of interesting findings thanks to the algorithm. And as I said, all these side projects are always, for me, a way to really experiment and envision new ways to communicate AI and machine learning technologies, because my ultimate goal is really to make them available to a broader audience of non-experts, which is fundamental to me. And because of this reason, I want to walk you through the last project that I want to show you. And this started last year at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, because I was reading and seeing a lot of different media outlets that were publishing data stories, but without using AI. So very few of them, even known, were using AI to provide that story. They were using and relying on traditional data analysis. And so I thought that we as IBMers, we had the tools and the knowledge, the expertise in the domain of AI to really provide people better insights to help them over the pandemic with new information and explain how that information could impact their lives. And so I designed and developed this platform that I called Crino. And this platform, it was really a moonshot to show how we could collect together a bunch of stories built upon AI technologies to really show people how the results, for example, of a machine learning model, like in this, in the case of these stories that I'm showing, could impact people's life, how people especially could cope with the uncertainty that is always included in every algorithm. And so we wanted to show not just the uncertainty and the useful information, but explain how a machine learning model works and extracts those predictions, and how those predictions have to be interpreted by people to not mislead who, as I said, doesn't have the right knowledge in the information they read and they get. And so this is very important to really explain how AI technology works and could help us in every moment of our life. And this effort especially was thought and designed to help the people, facilitate the understanding of people regarding AI, especially in a critical moment like a pandemic. Because if we think of how many information, how many data really there are, not just as a result of an AI technology, but also all the data information that lies behind in the process of making an AI technology, how the data are being used, how the data are processed, how there are some biases that maybe should be excluded. So there is really a big context of information that we can use in our data stories to facilitate the understanding of the people on these technologies. And I think that stories are the most powerful mean we have to do that, because stories help in explaining really complex ideas. Because stories can be shared, stories can be told. Stories, in my opinion, overcome barriers by building bridges between experts and domains that wouldn't be otherwise connected. And that's the power of really adopting an editorial approach to AI practices, because it brings together a lot of different people and experts, and is able to create something new out of it. And I guess that it's for this reason that at some point in my journey, I stopped to feel like the only isolated data journalist in a team of data scientists. And I progressively became aware of what my role was, and what was the mission that I could serve in that team with my own skills. And that mission, to me, it's really aiming to make AI more understandable, because I strongly believe that every time we deal with AI technologies, we have to put a genuine effort to communicate really the results of that of the AI's outcome. And by doing that, we have to connect people to people, not to where we are, but where they are. Because we have to make AI understandable for everyone, understandable and consumable. And this is what I call pop AI. Really making AI just enough pop to go beyond the barriers of the technical experts, of the subject matter experts of the field, because AI is so important to us today. And everyone deserves to understand how it works in an explainable way, and how especially it impacts our life. We have been assisting to a very bad rhetoric around AI for the for the major reason that people could really understand how it works and how it processes the data. And we have to stop that. And this is what is pop AI to me. And I really believe that by improving AI explainability, hopefully we can make AI fairer, and especially we can enhance trust in people's toward AI, that today we need more than anything else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mara. That was so insightful. The whole concept of pop AI and how data storytelling is actually means to making AI more understandable. It's amazing.
Thank you.
So right now, I think we'll take a few questions from the audience.
Mhm. Of
So
course.
anyone, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat below, and Mara can answer them for you. So let's see. So we had a question quite early on in the beginning. It was about how did you start off? Did you start off as technologist or an artist?
Okay, my background is very odd. I would say I've been trained as a humanist. I started my career in data in around 2013. I was doing my master's thesis. I was studying for my master's in digital humanities. And I decided after the bachelor's degree to take some time off to improve my English. And so in 2013, I left, I quit Italy, and I went to New York. And over there, I started my master's thesis, the project, because as many of you will know, the master's thesis is a big one. And over my research, I met some guys at Columbia University that were studying journalism. And they introduced me to the world of data journalism. And so I fall in love with the topic. And from there, I started my research in around data and how to communicate with data. So my master thesis became a book. I'm a published author in 2018, and in that time frame, I was so honored to work after my master's degree for a data-driven agency. And so I got experience with designers and developers. This agency is called Accurate, co-founded by Georgia Lupi, who is an information designer and partner at Pentagram in New York. And so after that experience, I won a scholarship for a second master's degree in data journalism specifically at the USC. So I left again Italy, moved to Los Angeles, studied data journalism over there. Then I got a job at Al Jazeera. So I worked as a data journalist for quite a while, and then I landed to IBM. So I started as a humanist, neither as an artist nor as a technologist.
That's amazing. That's a wonderful story. Well, we have a lot more questions now. So, one of the questions I see right now is could you briefly share what are the tools you use for visualization and what is the workflow for your approach to tackle these challenges at the beginning of a phase?
Yeah, about tooling, mostly D3.js and sometimes P5.js, so processing. But I use a lot D3 just because I'm freer to experiment with unusual visuals and I'm more in control of what I do. Um, and for starting these and tackling these kind of use cases, as I showed during the presentation, I always start with workshops and interviews that I really want to stress again are not UX interviews, but are really a moment to get to know the people, open up to people, and just being focused on them. Because eventually people are always our focus, the center of what we do. And so these are the very first steps with I start every project with.
Thank you for that. Another question that we have here is how do you recommend introducing an AI strategy when most technology systems used in the workplace currently seem outmoded? Yeah,
Currently seems, sorry.
outmoded. It's by Debbie Stubbs right here.
Okay. Okay. Let me start by saying that the concept of AI strategy is exactly really new to the most of the companies. It's really new in general. And I introduce usually that concept by telling the people I work with that AI strategy is the product of a bigger vision, a story. And we use really data storytelling to elevating the business strategy and to get to the AI strategy. So by using data storytelling, we can really envision the AI potentials and setting up a strategy for what that potential could look like. As I showed in the James Fisher example, it's really taking the data and combine them in novel ways to find the new solutions together. In that case was predictive and a prescriptive model together that no one had thought about. And it was the power of the data storytelling that really drove that result and drove that strategy, because again, at that point, the client saw an application of a model over there and a strategy, because that technical solution, how it was implemented, then drove also the requirements for data scientists and also for the data stewards on how to collect data and what data to collect, especially. And so it triggered a lot of mechanisms around James Fisher to really get to that final result. So data storytelling was for them the strategy, the North Star to really aim to then scale up that project.
Thank you for that. We'll take two more questions. So the next question for you is, do you think visual and data storytelling techniques vary across cultures and background? And would you use the same methods with a client in Italy that would be in like US or China?
Yes, yes, and I say a strong yes to that, because I believe that the power of visual stories, visual data stories, are really understood in the same way everywhere. And that's the power and the beauty of visual stories. I mean, it's a common language for everyone. So I wouldn't change anything, and I don't change anything when I deal with client in Europe rather than client in the US or in other parts in Africa, for example, in South Africa, I work with them. So
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. And then coming to our last question, how can we transform data stories from visual interpretations to something that's very interactive as an interventionist strategy, especially communicating critical issues like climate change and so on?
yeah, okay. So usually all the data stories that I make are interactive, and exactly for this reason, because we need to explain complex scenarios that play with a lot of data and dimensions. And so adding a layer of interactivity to the story itself by really interacting with the data and see how they visually transforms, how the information are being transformed by doing something, doing some actions, it's critical in almost every story. The format can change, but the dynamics of really making them moving and visually explaining through the movement also, I think that it's a component that is all in all my stories.
Thank you for that. I know I said last question, but we have two more questions in the chat. So are you up for answering?
No problem.
All right. So one of the questions is, what are the main challenges in communicating the AI algorithms to non-technical users?
I guess it's finding the right format that really makes that data explainable. It's not easy. It's a combination, I guess, of a story structure that works and achieves the objective to explain an algorithm, the information regarding an algorithm, and also the visual that you choose and pick. And so it's a combination of these both, and um, it changes every time. So it's very challenging also.
And in your opinion, is there something essential to know or any, like, for example, a skill in order to become a data storyteller?
I think a passion for stories and storytelling in general, because eventually what I always say is that the data is information, and we treat them as we would treat words and sentences. And as I said in the previous, I mean, answering the previous question, it's really more about how you structure the story and the storyline that you define, and then the rest follows. So, of course, it's important picking up with code because you have to manipulate data and being able to visualize them. It's important having a solid ground of information design, but eventually I think the most important ingredient is really being able to craft a story.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And that was the last question. So, thank you so much, Mara, for sharing your journey and your insights on data storytelling. I personally learned so much, and I've received so many comments in the chat about how your work and your career path is very inspiring. So, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you guys for attending and be in touch.
Yes, and for everyone else who attended our event today, thank you again for joining us. And if you want to find our other events or our articles or projects that we work on, you can find all the details on our website, AIxDesign.co. I think we'll drop the link over there. Yep. So thanks again for joining us. And you can find a recording of this talk on our YouTube channel shortly. So thank you once again.
Ciao.